Hola, piloncillos. Welcome to the 8th episode of the Offerings of Copal Podcast. This is your host, Cihua Mazatl. We are getting closer to Dia de los Muertos. And for me, this is a busy time. And for a lot of us, it's a busy time. For me, this happens to be where there's a lot of art shows and it's like art show season. And I've been busy with some art projects that I'm trying to get ready by Dia de los Muertos alongside the other things that I do. I thank you all for your patience. I didn't want to miss this week's episode, however, because I thought it would be a great opportunity to really dive into the season when the veil is getting thinner and we begin to receive messages and the connections and start to gather with our loved ones. Let's go on a journey through the underworld as understood by the Mexica people. For those just arriving, Mexica means the Aztec. Okay. This journey isn't just about death, but about the cycles of life, transformation, and remembrance. As the leaves begin to shift and change colors, we are reminded that death is a natural part of the process. And with Dia de los Muertos approaching, it's a perfect time to reflect on these themes. In today's episode, we're going to explore the 9 levels of Mictlan. If you don't know about them, this would be a nice time to dive in. Mictlan is the land of the dead in Mexica mythology, but we won't stop there. We're also going to take a closer look at how we celebrate Dia de los Muertos today, how the sacred tradition has been co-opted and commercialized, and what that means for us. And we'll finally dive deep into one of the most powerful cultural narratives we hold, the idea of sacrifice. What if the weight we carry isn't necessary? What if healing doesn't have to be so heavy? And before we close, we'll explore how death is honored across other ancient cultures, how Samhain and similar traditions teach us that death is a part of a sacred universal cycle. These practices remind us that death is not to be feared, but revered, and that by reconnecting with these ancient rituals, we can evolve them into something more meaningful for our modern lives. Let's begin on our journey to Mictlan and explore how we can honor our ancestors and ourselves through a deeper understanding of these sacred traditions. So grab your cafecito, your tecito, or light some copal as we sit and go on this journey together. The journey through Mictlan begins when a person passes away. For the Mexica, death was not the end, but a transition, a path that every soul must follow to return to the earth and the cosmos. It was believed that those who died of natural causes embarked on a long journey through the underworld. This journey took the soul through 9 distinct levels, each with its own trials and challenges. One of the things to note as you conduct your own research is that much of what you will encounter has been written with this lens, this bias that the Mexica nor the Aztec were a barbaric people, or that they were uncivilized. And so you'll encounter narratives that this journey through Mictlan is treacherous or vile or torturous. I think a lot of that comes from that Catholic lens as well, that hell, like of hell. And I don't really think that you can understand or conceptualize Mictlan through that lens, really. So our journey here begins at Apanohuaya, the place of the crossing waters. It is here where the soul must cross the great river, Apanohuaya. This crossing was not done alone, and the soul would rely on a companion, a guide, most often a choloitzcuintli, a sacred dog, to guide them across. This faithful companion represented loyalty and the bond between the living and the dead. I think this is one of those times where, it wasn't just the cholo itzcuintli, but I think a dog, your relationship that you have with one of these beings. The river itself symbolized the separation between two worlds and the soul's first step into letting go of its earthly attachments. It's essentially this journey through Mictlan is a journey of that, a journey of purification, of release, of lightening the load. Once across the river, the soul reaches Tepene Mona Mictlan, the place where the mountains crush together. Here, the towering cliffs grind and press together, symbolizing the powerful forces of nature that the soul must navigate. This stage reminds us of the balance in life, the dualities of creation and destruction, joy and grief that we must all face. Our next part of the journey, we arrive at Itztepet, the hill of obsidian, and we must climb this hill. And it is a painful experience as sharp volcanic glass cuts the soul's feet. But obsidian wasn't just a tool, it was a sacred symbol of clarity and transformation. It was something that created a spark. It brought light into the world as much as it could cut deep. This part of the journey teaches the soul that to ascend, to move forward, requires sacrifice and self-reflection. For not all paths on this journey, whether in life or in the afterlife, are smooth. The soul then enters Itzehekayan, the place of the obsidian winds, where the fierce winds filled with sharp shards tear at the body. This level represents the challenges we all face in life, the unseen forces of grief, sorrow, and loss that can disrupt our path. These winds strip away the superficial, leaving only what is true and necessary. It's almost removing that top layer of the skin. I think as we listen to this journey, it's important to consider this isn't meant to be taken literally, and we cannot apply our same senses and the way in which we perceive our current reality in the afterlife. For us, this may sound like this is something of suffering, but to me, I'm trying to look at it in the language of symbols. This is purification, a cleansing, of removing of those top layers, releasing the human shell. Next, we arrive at Empanyakatakoyan, the place where people float. Souls drift aimlessly, disconnected from the ground. This level reflects the feeling of being in a sort of limbo of uncertainty, of unknowing. It reminds us that transitions, both in life and in death, are natural, even if they leave us feeling ungrounded. Next, we arrive in Timiminaloyan, the place where arrows fly. This place tests the soul's resilience. Invisible arrows shoot through the air, representing the unpredictable challenges we face in life. But like in life, the soul must continue forward, trusting that each step brings them closer to peace. It is as if the human life prepares us also for this journey, which only lasts 4 years. You must traverse through Mictlan in 4 years. Our next place is the Yolokwaloyan, the place where jaguars eat hearts. The jaguar, or the ocelot, is a sacred symbol of power and courage. It devours the hearts of souls. This act is not violence, but transformation. The jaguar frees the soul from its earthly ties, allowing it to embrace its spiritual essence. The final stages of the journey take the soul through Izmictlanapochcalolca, the place of smoke and mirrors, where illusions test the soul's perception of reality. It is here where the smoke and mirrors represents the lies and fears we must see through to understand our true selves. And it's not just lies and fears, but it is our narratives. The stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we have, continue to tell ourselves. And some of these stories are the perceptions that we have of the world and how we want things to be. Finally, the soul reaches Chikuna Mictlan, the place of eternal rest, where the soul meets Mictlan-Tecutli, the lord of the underworld, and his pareja dual, Mictacasihuatl. After enduring all trials, the soul can finally rest, reuniting with the earth and the cosmos in peace. Part of this journey into Mictlan, as I mentioned, it is to strip the soul of these senses of identity so that it may return to that source, so it may be cleansed through that source. Now, this doesn't mean that our loved ones disappear, who they are disappears, but they are a part of a bigger cycle. We all are, in which we must return and give back that energy that we borrowed. And that's why it's important that we acknowledge and remember that ancestors, our loved ones, live in our memory. The North, Mictlampa, is the place of memory, of time. And these ancestors live within us, literally within us, within our DNA, within the memories that we have of them. And even if we cannot consciously remember them or say their names, they're still within us. Their ways of being, the features on your face are their legacy. As we approach Dia de los Muertos, it's important to remember that this journey through Mictlan was about balance, transformation, and letting go, both for the soul and for the living. This sacred tradition of remembering our loved ones wasn't about clinging to them and keeping them earthbound. It was about honoring their memory, helping them on their journey, and recognizing our place in the eternal cycle of life and death. But today, I think it's important to ask ourselves, has Dia de los Muertos lost some of its meaning? With the rise of films like Coco, and nowadays it's, I'm very lucky that I was blessed with the opportunity to take care of a Coloitzcuitle. And whenever we go out, that's the most common reference nowadays. Like, oh, it's that dog from Coco. But it's a testament to how far and wide that movie has become. And the children's schools, this Dia de los Muertos is one of the most profitable of their fundraising days because of the magic and the enchantment that is associated with this. It has become more familiar. And while it is wonderful to see that this tradition gain recognition, there is a fine line between awareness and commercialization. Dia de los Muertos that we see today, with its colorful sugar skulls and mass-produced decorations, is at risk of becoming a product. Those sugar skulls, those decorations were something that families came together and would cut and, put the sugar together, create these ofrendas for our ancestors. And very recently we have a Mexican supermarket, and they were selling the sugar skulls, and that's fine. I really don't know how handmade they really are. I'm sure they're hand painted, but here it is at a mass supermarket. But we're at a place where we're at risk of all of it becoming a product, something that is packaged and sold, disconnected from its sacred roots. It is important that we need to challenge this shift Dia de los Muertos is not just an aesthetic. It's not just a flower crown. It's not just the face paint, especially on Halloween, que es nada que ver. It's not just about the cempasúchil or the marigold, which, by the way, a lot of the cempasúchil that you see at the grocery store that's sold in a maceta, in a pot, a flower pot, is not even grown from Mexico. It's a product that comes from China. And no offense to China, but that's not the same. That's not the same cempasúchil. And you can smell it because cempasúchil smells so fragrant and beautiful, and these flowers don't. And it's not just about the marigold or cempasúchil or the face paint. It's about remembrance, connection, and the sacred honor for our ancestors, those that paved the way before us, those for whom we are here. When we commercialize these practices, we run the risk of turning something deeply spiritual into a performance, into a show meant to entertain rather than to honor. And I feel like this is a bigger issue. It's one that is difficult to tackle. And it's also stemming from Mexico itself. And I'm sure if you visited Oaxaca in the last year compared to how it was even just 4 years ago, it's very different. The indigenous people there have been pushing back to gentrification, the appropriation that is happening, that has been happening. And the people that made coco, y'all know who they were, went to the towns and went to observe how the traditions were practiced, specifically in Oaxaca. And the tradition of Dia de los Muertos is practiced very differently all over Mexico, depending on the region. I can tell you in the north, my family, they don't do the big altars like you see in that movie. They have altars, but on Dia de los Muertos, El Dia de los Angelitos, the days leading up to Dia de los Muertos is something that is, we go to los panteones, we go to the cemeteries, and you clean the graves and you do your ofrendas there. But it's different, and even now, the way that it's celebrated now, it looks very different than it did 5, 6, 8, 10 years ago. Because of this commercialization, I think too about Mexico City. This is something me and my pareja dual talk about quite a bit. We have our connections in Oaxaca, and it's a place that we love very much. And, we have our own connections in other parts of Mexico as well. And recently in Mexico City, in Ciudad de Mexico, there's been more and more fuss about Dia de los Muertos. There's a big parade now, and there's Catrinas. There's all these like big celebrations that didn't used to happen, but is happening because of Coco. So yes, it's good that more and more people, even people in Mexico that have lost touch with these traditions or don't celebrate it in the way they once used to, are now celebrating it in that way. It's like a fine line to cross, a fine line to walk between these two, even as people to whom these traditions belong, but just being mindful to the origins of these traditions is so important. So there is a fine line between awareness and commercialization. Dia de los Muertos is not just an aesthetic. It's when we commercialize these practices, we run the risk of turning something deeply spiritual into a performance. It's something meant to entertain rather than to honor. We have to ask ourselves, are we truly remembering our loved ones? Are we participating in a sanitized version of a tradition that demands reflection and reverence? It's crazy to me to think that Dia de los Muertos was once, it's something that that people participated in for more than 2 days. It's a 3 veintena process. And as we reach this last veintena of Miquel is when we really observe some of these more elaborate altar creations, etc., what you've come to see. I want to bring up something else. This brings up a larger question about our cultura, the idea of sacrifice. And I do feel that this is relevant because it's one of those things where the commercialization of our cultura in Mexico has it seemed like it's been like a necessary part in the growth of Mexico through tourism. It's one of the biggest economic flows for Mexico is tourism, but it's at the cost often of selling the culture. And this isn't just a Mexico problem. I think this is something that a lot of countries are grappling with. Like recently Japan, for example, has had such a huge influx of tourists that they're putting walls in certain places where people would stand. It's caused such a problem that they've had to close certain sectors off where like the geishas would walk because they were being harassed, or there's just a number of different issues that can come from all of this. And it's not just Mexico, but it is something that we have to look at in the greater picture of how it is that we are consuming things, appropriating ourselves of things that are contributing to a larger problem. In our cultura, sacrifice is often seen as the noble path. It is the idea that we must suffer in silence, that we must carry our burdens alone. But what if this tradition of sacrifice is this belief that pain is something to be endured, is holding us back from true healing? Even when looking at the concept of Mictlan and the journey, and I feel like the cosmology, what is written about Mictlan, it is written by people. And that's something we have to remember about all these things. I love the mystique, the enchantment, as we dive into the cosmovision of our ancestors. And I think it's important to also have one foot in reality and an understanding that whatever it is that we've written about the afterlife comes from the perspective of our human reality. And there are these aspects, of sacrifice, of having to have your skin cut and your feet cut, to move through, to remove those human layers. And although I think an aspect of that within our human reality is true. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to do your own shadow work, or if you're here, that means you've been on a healing journey and you had to walk through some of these very real levels in real life. There are times where we have to walk through the sharp glass and persevere. And these instances are all symbolic of this journey. And I've been really questioning this idea if sacrifice, how necessary is the sacrifice? How necessary is it that we push ourselves in such a way? And I see it so much in all of our cultura. I come from an immigrant background as well. And I grew up with this. I grew up with having to witness my mother sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice. And she would call it that, she seemed very not happy about the things she had to do. And I think I grew up with that weight as well of, oh, you can't waste a single moment, a single breath, a single anything because of the sacrifice that it's taken to be here or whatever. And I'm really starting to question that. And I hope that you take a moment as well to challenge some of these narratives in your own heart as well. Because too often we internalize the idea that challenging unhealthy situations or setting boundaries makes us selfish. We're taught to put others first, even when it comes at a great cost to ourselves. But this cycle of sacrifice doesn't lead to healing, it leads to denial. Now, this isn't to say that we don't care about community or that we don't consider, but if we can't be at a healthy place ourselves? How do we show up to community in a healthy way without that resentment and without that need or feel to sacrifice? There is an element of sacrifice for the greater whole or the greater good, but where do we draw the line? Such a belief leads to habits and patterns that numb the pain that we carry instead of addressing it. And in doing so, we pass these burdens on to the next generation. And as we approach Dia de los Muertos, so much comes up for so many people. Whether it's unprocessed grief or emotions or sadness or whatever feelings, as much as there is veneration and honor and you remember your passed on loved ones, this isn't about just remembering them on this time of year. I recently had a conversation with one of my tias. We were talking about visiting my grandmother at the cemetery, and she felt a little dismayed that there weren't more visitations happening during other times of the year. She said that she visited frequently, but she felt saddened that some other family members wouldn't do the same, that they only went during Dia de los Muertos. Again, I feel like these awarenesses are important because it helps us consider how deep our intention really is when we make these connections. For me personally, I've always enjoyed having the pictures of my loved ones that have transcended, on an altar year round. I like to see them. I like to connect with them. I like to see my grandmother's face on a daily basis. I don't want to just pull out her picture once a year. And I do believe that this is part of this denial process, that sometimes that we deny ourselves going through those motions of feeling whatever it is that you think you're going to feel, whether it's loss. But when we make those conscious connections every day, it doesn't have to feel like we've lost something. But when it comes to addressing this idea of sacrifice and what it takes, I feel that living in a life of sacrifice can fill us with pain, fill us with resentments. And it is important that we make peace and we choose to live life differently now, so that when it comes to the day that we transcend and what we leave behind for our future generations, that we're not the picture that someone wants to take out only once a year. That it is that we've cultivated a relationship where our memory continues to be honored. And it is such a difficult time for people. And even when thinking about the ancestors and the ancestral journey, when we think about the quote unquote bad ancestors, or the ones that maybe weren't quote unquote good, and what does that mean? And what does it mean when thinking about our relationships with them in the afterlife? When you go through this afterlife process, at least according to our ancestors and according to my understanding of this, is that there is a reality check, for all of us, of and needing to take accountability for our actions in this life in order to transcend and move through those levels of Mictlan, so that when we come back as that clean slate, that clean soul, we're not passing on these burdens to the next generation. What if we let go of this weight of sacrifice? What if we allowed ourselves to be compassionate, not towards others, but towards ourselves, not just towards others, but to ourselves as well? Healing doesn't have to be so heavy. Grief, just like death, is natural. It's not meant to be carried alone or in silence or tucked away and only brought out once a year. The soul's journey through Mictlan teaches us that we are meant to move through grief, not to be trapped by it. By embracing compassion and setting boundaries, we can begin to break free of these cycles of intergenerational trauma. We can let go of the burdens that were never ours to carry in the first place. By healing ourselves, we create new patterns for future generations, patterns of love, care, and self-respect. But before we get to that point, we have to be brave and we have to be honest and be willing to look at our pain and our trauma and look at the ideas and the narratives and the choices that we're making that maybe weren't put there by us to begin with. What contracts, what are you pursuing that you may be trying to fulfill from a previous generation? Is it truly yours? Is that really what you want? And while Dia de los Muertos is a tradition specific to Mexico, the themes it carries, the honoring of the dead, the connection to our ancestors, and the acceptance of death as a part of life, are universal. Many ancient cultures around the world share similar beliefs. And it's not just people, too. I want to point out that animals, or our animal brother and sisters, also have their own death rituals. Like, take elephants, for example. They literally have funerals for each other. And I don't know if you knew this about dolphins, but dolphins, if a dolphin dies, first of all dolphins have names that they know. But when a dolphin dies, they'll whistle their dead companion's name in honor. And this, let me return to the point, but take Samhain, for example. This is an ancient Celtic festival that marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. Like Dia de los Muertos, it was a time when the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was believed to be thin. It was a time to honor the ancestors, to invite them into the home, and to recognize the cyclical nature of life. Offerings were made, not to bind the dead to the living, but to celebrate their journey into the next realm. And similarly, like Dia de los Muertos, Samhain was also co-opted and commercialized and repackaged into the Halloween that we know of today. And Halloween is like a whole other thing that it would be fun to talk about. I was talking to my partner the other day, talking about the way that Halloween has morphed from something that celebrated the spirit of those that had transcended to now a exaltation of horror and the different sort of horror. And also commenting about the different decorations and how you could see like different people's different perceptions of horror. And horror is going to have to be another topic for another day, because it is a very interesting thing to dive into, as it reflects the fears of our society. Anyway, in the same way, cultures from Africa to Asia have long understood that death is not the end. For the Maasai people of Kenya, for instance, death rituals help guide the soul to join the ancestors in the spirit world. Similarly, in Japan's Obon festival, people honor the spirits of their ancestors with dances, offerings, and lanterns, recognizing the continued presence of those that have passed. What these traditions tell us is that death is a universal experience, one that has always been met with reverence, reflection, and honor. The more we connect with these ancient practices, the more we honor not just our ancestors, but also our most ancient ancestor, Mother Earth, Mictlan-Embracing. For all of us, no matter where we come from, death is a part of the natural cycle, just as life is. The beauty of these ancient traditions lies in their adaptability. As we evolve, so too can our practices, contrary to what we've been taught. And also, I think it's important to look at where we're at. We've continued with much of the same formats as before, but look where it has gotten us. And we've forgotten about some of the most important pieces along the way. So while, yes, there are naysayers, I do think it's so important to evolve and transcend and connect with the time that we are living in, because we cannot go back and things cannot be how they were. We're not going to venerate and honor and have exactly the same traditions and doing it in exactly the same way as we used to, because that is before, that is the past. It's no longer now. Despite this, In this evolution, it is important that we be careful to not lose the essence of what these rituals represent. We can evolve without commercialization. We can modernize without disconnecting from the sacred. As we prepare for the Los Muertos this year, let's reflect on how we can honor this tradition in a way that is true to its original intent. The celebration is not meant to trap our loved ones here with us, but to help them continue their journey. It's about remembering them with love, yes, but also about honoring their transition to the next realm. We don't need elaborate altars or expensive decorations. What we need is intention, humility, and reverence. A personal practice can be as simple as lighting a candle, saying a prayer, or telling a story that keeps their memory alive. We can honor our ancestors by living fully and healing the wounds that have been passed down through generations. And most importantly, we must remember that death, like life, is a part of the sacred cycle. It's not something to fear, nor something to be made into a spectacle. It's a time of transformation for both the dead and the living. This is a time where we go within and reflect on our own lives as well, and what we need to transform, what may need to die for us. And it is important also to honor the versions of us, the past versions of us, and the work that we are doing. What is it that we are keeping alive? What is worth passing on? And what don't we want to pass on? This Dia de los Muertos, I invite you to reclaim the sacred time, not as something to be consumed, but as something to be lived and cherished. Let's honor our loved ones by creating a personal practice rooted in compassion, in connection, and the deep understanding that we too are a part of this eternal cycle. Classical Mati for joining me in this conversation. I hope that this has been stimulating. I hope that this has been thought-provoking. And let me know how you feel about this. Let me know, what are some of your ancestors' practices? How is it that you celebrate it in your region of the world, in your region of the country? How has modern interpretations of this tradition affected you? And it's okay to be inspired by Coco, which we mentioned earlier, and it's okay that it maybe inspired you to pick up this tradition. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is important that, in my opinion, that you use your hands, that you cut that paper yourself, that you grow your cempasúchil. Actually, I got to grow some cempasúchil this year, and I got yellow ones. They're really beautiful. I did plant orange ones, but yellow ones are the ones that came out. And so it has been a beautiful process for me. And, that's just one of the ways that I've connected, and it's a practice that I'm establishing, as well as what I've shared in this podcast. But your connection and the way that you celebrate Dia de los Muertos can only be defined by you. But I do hope that this episode has given you some reference and somewhere to begin, or giving you some important considerations. Well, with that being said, I'm looking forward to continuing to connect with my ancestors and honoring them, and to honor them through art, and to give an offering through art. And I can't wait to show you what I create in this next coming weeks, and send me some energy. I'm going to need it as I go through this process. Now, I just received my black and white books, my paperback books of Tlahtoli Oracle. If you don't know where to begin on your ancestral journey, my book, Tlahtoli Oracle, offers some powerful medicine, especially if you're an ancestor journey or you're on a healing journey. This is a book that I've put in a lot of love. It's a divination book. What that means, it's a book where you can turn the pages, when you have a question, whatever page you land on is your message. And you can use it in a multitude of different ways. I do have some black and white copies ready to go, and I will be offering some hardcover signed copies. I only have a very limited amount of hardcover signed copies available. I'll be listing them soon, definitely by next week. So it's just one of those things, but I hope that you check them out. I'll be leaving all the links in the description, and I hope that you all have a blessed week. Let me know if there's any particular topics or anything that you want me to talk about. And yeah, just comment below and let me know what this experience has been like for you. Again, Tlaxcamati, sending you all lots of love. Adios.